recently, and I just finished the Sermon on the Mount. And so I picked up in Matthew chapter 8, and I've been meditating on servanthood all week. Our text is going to be John chapter 13. So if you want to just find John chapter 13, that's where we're eventually going to go, believe it or not. But as I was reading through Matthew, I was just amazed, and I've never, ever seen this before. I've been reading, that's one thing beautiful about the Bible. It's not a dead book. It is a living book. It's active. It's powerful. It's sharper than a two-edged sword. It's a discerner of our thoughts and the intents of our heart. That's Hebrews chapter 4, verse 14. That's the power of this book. But I was reading in Matthew's gospel, and as soon as he finished the Sermon on the Mount, the first thing that Jesus had to do was to heal a leper. Now, lepers were common in Israel, and it was one of the most dreaded diseases of the ancient Near East because it was incurable. And the last thing that you wanted to do was come in contact with a leper. They had to cry out with a piece of cloth over their mouth because their breath might infect other people. And they would cry out, "Unclean, unclean." Can you imagine your whole life, everywhere you went? Every time you went into the grocery store, you'd have to warn people that you were unclean. Everything that you did, you'd go into a restaurant and they'd probably close the door to you. And this man came to Jesus and Jesus touched him. Right after he cleansed the leper, he went to his hometown of Capernaum. And the first thing that he was met by was a centurion. The centurion said, "Please come to my house, my servant's sick." So he just heals a leper. The next thing on the agenda is going to a centurion's house to heal his servant. After the servant was healed, he went to Peter's house, and he gets to Peter's house, and he finds out that Peter's mother-in-law's got a fever, and they ask Jesus to do something about it, so he goes over and he touches her, and he heals her. Well, Jesus thought he might get a night's sleep there at Peter's house, but instead they throng his home by so many people that you can't even get in the door, and all night long, Jesus is curing people, casting out devils, and giving himself to others. So what does Jesus do? He gets up before it's even daybreak so he can go up to the mountains and get alone with God and pray. And Peter comes to him, he says, "Lord, everybody's looking for you. They're wanting you to perform more miracles." He says, "Guys, let's go to the other side of the sea because I've come to preach the gospel." And so he gets in the boat and he goes to the other side of the sea, and he's so tired from ministering all day long and giving himself to others that he falls asleep in the boat. The disciples come and they wake him up and they say, "Jesus, don't you even care that we're perishing?" So he can't even get a decent nap on the boat, and he has to get up and he rebukes the wind, and there's a great calm. And they look at each other and say, "What manner of man is this that even the winds and the sea obey his voice?" That's the whole point. I'm reading in Jeremiah also during my morning devotions, and one of the attributes of God is that God controls the wind. Jesus was none less than God in human flesh as he spoke to the wind and it became calm. He gets to the other side of the sea, and what is he met by? He's met with a demoniac who lives out in the caves, cutting himself with rocks, chains that he breaks asunder because no man can tame him. And the demons are so fierce that they are called legion. A legion, I think, was 1,000 soldiers in the Roman army. And this guy was plagued by thousands of demons. And Jesus graciously touches him and changes his life. He gets back in the boat and goes back over to Capernaum thinking he might get some rest. But no way. As soon as he gets there, the ruler of the synagogue, Jairus by name, says, "Come, Jesus, my daughter is at the point of death. In fact, she's probably already dead by the time I've got here. Now I want you to come to my house and do something." Again, Jesus is seen serving. Jesus is walking to Jairus' house, and in the midst of the crowd, a woman says, "You know what? I need Jesus so bad. I've tried everything on earth to be healed, and I'm just getting sicker. I have spent my entire life savings on doctors, and I'm just getting worse. But if I can just touch the hem of Jesus' cloak, I'll get better." What kind of faith is that? And so she reaches out in the middle of the crowd and touches Jesus. And she's instantly healed of her hemophilia. And Jesus turns around and begins to minister to her. All this is in the space of about 45 verses in the New Testament. You see, Jesus' life was nothing but giving, serving, and humility. And he's an example to his apostles constantly. And one of their biggest bickering arguments was, who is going to be greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Who's going to be top dog? Who's going to sit on the throne right next to Jesus? Who's going to get to sit on the left hand and who's going to get to sit on the right hand? And all Jesus came to do was to serve. And these guys aren't getting it. So in Matthew chapter 18, Jesus says, call a little child. And he set him in the midst of them. And then Jesus says, unless you guys are converted. It's a powerful Greek word. And it's translated to convert something. We do it with electric power. We take a converter and we change it. When Tracy and I went to Ireland, all of our appliances were on 110 voltage. And so we took this huge box with us everywhere we go. It was called our converter. It changed it from 110 volts to 220. We had to use it. It had to be transformed. It had to be different. It had to be changed. And that's exactly what Jesus is saying to us today about being a servant. Unless we get a changed attitude, unless we're converted, unless we are transformed from within, the Greek word is strepho. It means to turn and go in a different direction. I looked it up in a lexicon this week, and in Matthew chapter 18, it literally means to be changed from the inside out. You see, man is good about changing the outside appearance. You know, that's all we care about. How does the guy look? Well, you know, I'm dressed up like a preacher today. Got my suit and I got my tie. But you know what? God could give a hoot about the way I look on the outside. Because it's not from the outside where a man is defiled. Defilement comes from within. Out of the man's heart proceeds blasphemy, evil thoughts, adultery, covetousness. Those are the things that bothers God. And God in Jesus said, unless you are converted and become like a little child, you're not even going to make it into heaven. In Mark chapter 10, the argument ensues again. Who's going to be the greatest? Who's going to be number one in the kingdom? And so Jesus looks at the disciples. In fact, it was James and John, the sons of thunder, the sons of Zebedee, and they put their mother up to asking Jesus. These two guys don't even want to come to Jesus themselves, so they say, Mom, go ask Jesus if we can have the best seats in the kingdom of heaven. I want to sit on the right side. James says, I want to sit on the left side, and we'll have Jesus right in the middle, and everybody will think, boy, James and John, they are the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And the 10 hear it, and they're greatly displeased. You know why they're greatly displeased? Because they're thinking they should have those spots. They're not getting it. And so Jesus calls the 12 to himself, and he says, guys, I want to explain something again to you. The world has its system of greatness. The world's system of greatness, those who are leaders lord it over everybody else. They condescend to other people. The Greek word is kata chorisma. It means to lord it down on other people. And then he uses another word, it's kata exousia. It means to have your authority placed over others because your rights are more important and your privileges are more important. And that's the way the world works. You go to the CEO. You go to the president of the corporation, whoever it is, it's his rights, it's his authority, it's his agenda that's most important. And then Jesus turns around and he says, yet it's not going to be among you guys like that. You want to be chief? You be a deacon. Diakonos is the Greek word. It means that you serve other people. And then he says, you want to be proton? You want to be first? You learn to become a doulos, a bond slave who has no rights, who has no privileges. That's what it means to be great in the kingdom of heaven. And he says, and I'll give you an example. For even the Son of Man. You see, Jesus had a lot of titles, But the name that he most frequently referred to himself was the Son of Man. He took upon every bit of humanity, even though he was fully God. He says, for even the Son of Man didn't come to be ministered unto, to be served, but to serve and to do what? To give his life a ransom for, on behalf of many. Jesus came to die so that we might live. What a servant. Now, right on the eve of Jesus' last Passover, in Luke's gospel, it tells us that Jesus said with great fervent desire, I have wanted to eat this Passover with you people. And he says, I won't eat it again until I eat it in the kingdom of heaven. The minute the disciples hear the kingdom of heaven, you know where their thoughts start running again? Who's going to be greatest in the kingdom of heaven? These guys, after 3 years, are still bickering and quarreling about who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So in the middle of this Passover meal, we find John chapter 13. And let's just go to that text and read it. John's Gospel, chapter 13, verses 1 through 16. Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour was come, that he should depart out of this world unto the Father, having loved his own which were in the world, he loved them unto the end. And supper, now in progress, it says ended in the King James, but the idea is that supper is in progress. The devil, having now put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him. Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he was come from God, and that he went to God, he riseth from supper. He laid aside his garments, and he took a towel, and he girded himself. After that, he poured water into a basin, and he began to wash the disciples' feet, and to wipe them with a towel wherewith he was girded. Then cometh he to Simon Peter, and Peter saith unto him, Lord, doth thou wash my feet? Peter just can't accept the idea that the Lord, the God, the sovereign Lord, whom earlier Peter said, depart from me, I'm a sinful man, is now bowing down at his feet to wash him. And Peter says, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? Jesus said unto him, what I'm doing you don't know right now, but thou shalt know hereafter. Just trust me, Peter. But Peter doesn't. Peter's impulsive, and like usual, he sticks his foot in his mouth. Good thing Jesus was washing his foot for him, right? He said, Simon Peter, if I do not wash your feet, you have no part with me. Simon, you'd better understand the spiritual implications of what I'm doing. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, I got it, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Jesus said to him, he that is washed, already cleansed by me, needeth not save to wash, but his feet. You know, I've been saved once. I'm still going to mess up all the time. I don't need to get saved all over again. I just need to confess my sin, and he's faithful and just to forgive me and to cleanse me from all unrighteousness. I've already been washed by the blood of Christ. I just need to come and confess. And Jesus says that to Peter. You're already in my family. You don't need a bath. You just need me to wash your feet because you got dirty walking out in the world today. Then Jesus says, you are clean, but not every whit, not altogether. He's not talking about Peter at this point. Jesus is talking figuratively, for he knew, verse 11, who would betray him. He says, there's a guy in the midst who's never been washed by me. Judas has never been born again. He's never become my child. Therefore, he said, you are all not clean. So after he had washed their feet and taken his garment and he sat down again, he said to them, you know what I've done to you? You call me master. The Greek word there, master, is didaskalos, which literally means the teacher. I am the teacher. And I am the Lord. And you say, well, for so I am. You see, Jesus doesn't deny that He is chief, that He is great. Yes, He is chief. Yes, He is great. And if the greatest of the greatest, if the Lord of lords and the King of kings took off His garments and took the towel of a servant and stooped down and did the lowliest job that a slave would do, can you imagine what it was like in Palestine? I mean, they didn't have paved roads back then. And they didn't wear nice Nikes. And they didn't wear, I don't even know what these things are, but I polished them today just for church. But they didn't have these kind of shoes either. They walked around in sandals. And your feet were calloused. And they were smelly. And they were dirty. And Jesus got down on His knees, the King of kings, the Lord of lords, by which everyone will confess one day. And He's washing their feet. He says, yes, you call me the teacher. You call me the master. You call me the Lord because that's who I am. And if I have done this for you, you ought to wash one another's feet. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. I want to give you a short outline on servanthood from the way Jesus taught it. You see, Jesus had no problem doing the jobs that no one else was willing to do. Why? Because Jesus was completely secure in His relationship to God. If you today are so secure in your relationship with God, it won't bother you one bit doing the task and doing the jobs that nobody else wants to do. Jesus knew what His purpose in life was. If we get this understanding right, when we come to Christ, we don't come to be served. We come to be a part of the family of God so that we can serve others. And Jesus knew exactly what His life on earth was all about. It says in the beginning of this text that Jesus knew that His hour had come. We find that phrase all through John's Gospel. The first time it's mentioned is in John chapter 2, when they ran out of wine at the wedding feast, and the mother says, "Do something, Jesus." And His answer to her, "My hour has not yet come." But now Jesus says, "My hour is here. I know it's here." Jesus also knew that He was going to the Father. And He knew that He'd come from the Father. You see, Jesus knew where He was going in life, and He was secure in it. If you know your position in Jesus today, you know that you're a King of kings. You know that you're a saint. You know that you've been made holy. You know that you've been justified. You'll be willing to do whatever it is. There is no job within the Christian church that is beneath any of us. If it's washing the toilets after church, that's not beneath any of us. If it's vacuuming the carpets, if it's setting up here, the music, it doesn't matter. We are not above anything because we know we have an eternal home, and that's where things really matter. And Jesus knew all that right well. The second point of being a servant is sometimes we humbly have to accept being served by others. See, that's not always an easy thing to do. Sometimes it takes just as much humility to accept being served by others. Peter said, "You know what? I don't want you to do this, Lord." And I think Peter had the right attitude at first. But then he goes from having the right attitude to almost the attitude of rebellion. He almost had humility mixed with pride. "I'm so humble, God, that I won't let you do this for me. I'm such a servant that I'm not going to let you serve me." And Peter learned this lesson. Before you and I can ever serve others, we've got to humble ourselves before Christ and let Him serve us. Jesus told Peter if I don't wash your feet, if you don't allow me to do this and you don't submit to this, you've got no part in me. Two things that I want to share with you. One is I've got to submit to Jesus Christ as Lord, even if I don't understand it. Did Jesus reply back to him? Jesus said, you don't understand it right now, but later on I'm going to clear it up for you. God might ask you to do some things in your life that you really don't understand. But you've just got to accept him and say, you know what? He's Lord. He's boss. I'm going to let him have his way. The second thing that Jesus meant, unless I wash your feet, Peter, you have no part in me. You see, we're all filthy, dirty sinners. And unless we come to Jesus in humility, we'll never know how to serve others. But when we allow Jesus Christ to serve us and to minister to us and to forgive us and to listen to our prayers, it changes us from the inside. And that's what Jesus is getting at. You're going to learn it later on, because what I have done to you, Peter, I want you to turn around and do to others. The last thing, Christ's example, what real leadership is all about. He said, you call me Lord and Master, and that's the right thing to call me. I've shown you by humility what it means to be great in the kingdom of heaven. I brought a child in, and I set him in the midst of you. And I taught you that unless you become converted, unless you transform your thinking and are changed from within, you'll never get to the kingdom of heaven. You want to be great in God's kingdom this day? It takes humility. The second thing that Jesus taught by this example is it takes sacrifice to be great in the kingdom of heaven. Jesus just didn't give 33 years. He gave his life's blood on the cross. The third thing that Jesus was teaching them is that there's no menial task that is too much for us to do. The most important thing that Jesus was teaching in this example is that we should be taking time to serve each other within the body of Christ. I want you to do this to each other. The second thing that Jesus was teaching us, I have taught you by example. I have washed your feet. I have cleansed your feet. Now I want you to take this message, this powerful gospel that washes the soul whiter than snow. Folks, I want you to hear this verse today. Isaiah 1:18. Come now, let us reason together, saith the Lord. Though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. Though they be red like crimson, they shall be as wool. And there's nothing other than the blood of Jesus Christ that can wash away sin. Without the shedding of blood, there is no remission. For the life of man is in the blood. And Jesus poured it out. And Jesus said, unless I wash your feet, you've got no message to tell a lost and dying world. But when Jesus washes your feet, you've got something to share with people. Unfortunately, we can understand these principles, but we're a lot like the disciples. He said, if you know these things, happy are you if you do them. Let's really bring it down to the practical level. What does that mean within my life? It means I ought to be a better listener than I am a talker. So many times I listen to people, and the whole time they're talking, I'm really not listening. I'm just thinking about what I'm going to say back. I should be a better listener if I'm a servant to others than I am a talker. I should be a gracious receiver of gifts, and I should be a generous giver of gifts. I should be looking at other people's interests instead of my own. And I should esteem others' wants and needs above myself. And that's the kind of disciples Jesus wants to train in our church. Let's close with prayer.